Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. 58 years after independence, is India justified in creating a Ministry of Minority Affairs? Is the country justified in treating its minorities differently to the mainstream? Those are the key questions that I shall put today to the Minister of Minority Affairs, a new portfolio created just 6 weeks ago, A R Antulay. Mr. Antulay, 58 years after independence, and at a time when we are proud to claim that India is a united country, how do you justify the surprise and sudden creation of a Ministry of Minority Affairs?
I think your first part of the question includes the answer. You have very well answered that when India is all Indians are in mainstream, you said something like that, if I recall correctly. In fact, this ministry is created, as per my conception, to bring all the minorities into the mainstream of Indian life.
So you're saying that at the moment, as you see them, the minorities are not in the mainstream?
Everybody knows that all minorities don't feel totally at home. Otherwise Gujarat would not have happened. These things are happening simply because, why? On religious basis, on linguistic basis. Both things have taken place.
Let's be honest, when you talk about minorities,
yes,
you really are talking about religious minorities, and primarily you're talking about the Muslims.
No, not at all. We are talking
You just mentioned Gujarat. Clearly that means you're talking about the Muslims.
No, when you said, why do you think of this, I mean, that religious minorities feel rather different from others.
And the example you gave was Gujarat, so therefore
because
clearly...
that's recent.
So Muslims are the prime focus in your mind?
No, not at all, not at all.
But they're a very important part of your focus.
No, Mr. Karan, I think you know me very well. My secular credentials can never be doubted. Even the enemies or foes or opponents have not done so. And certainly you being friend, you will not do so, 1 minute. I am a secular person, that is why I thank Sonia ji, I thank Manmohan ji for A, having created this ministry, though late, but they couldn't have helped it because they were not there earlier in the authority,
so
A, and B, for having put me as a secular Muslim or a secular Indian to bring all minorities in. And please, please, no, I have not completed. I have not completed. I have not. No, I have not completed. Among the religious minorities are Hindus also. Hindus of J&K, Hindus of Punjab, Hindus of Northeast
All right, let's come to the substantive argument.
Yeah.
You've got the PR exercise over with. You've thanked Sonia ji, you've thanked Dr. Manmohan Singh. Now let me quote to you what the Supreme Court has said. Last year in August, the Supreme Court said that the classification of religious groups as minorities could damage the unity of India. Let me quote, "The whole country, which is already under class and social conflicts due to various divisive forces, will further face divisions on the basis of religious diversities." And then most pointedly, the Supreme Court says, "Encouragement to such vociferous tendencies would be a serious jolt to the secular structure of India's constitutional democracy." I put it to you that the creation of a Ministry of Minority Affairs is a slap in the face of the Supreme Court.
I think if you don't mind it, you are quoting out of context.
I'm not.
You see, there was in whether the Jains should or should not be included in among the minorities.
Precisely.
If you see the entire judgment, read as a whole, not the part of it. This context, out of context thing, excuse me, will not convey their intent and purpose.
Forgive me, I'm interrupting you. Their intent was to say that in fact the classification of religious groups as minorities should be ended. It should be diminished, it should not be added to.
Excuse me, an intellectual like you should say that I'm really surprised. They have said, yes, even the Jains should be included amongst the religious minorities, but in the states, not at the center.
Absolutely, and we are talking about a central ministry.
So what is good? No, excuse me. So what is good in the state is not good in the center?
That's certainly what the Supreme Court is suggesting. That's what the Supreme Court is suggesting.
Please. See, I'm asking you a question. You are asking me a question. I'm asking you a question. Please, Mr. Thapar, do you think that if A happens to be minority in a state, the same A is not minority in the
Let me
country.
answer your question by pointing you towards the views of Pratap Bhanu Mehta, not just one of the country's leading academics, but someone who was personally chosen by the Prime Minister as a member of the new prestigious Knowledge Commission. Writing in the Indian Express in January, this is what Pratap Bhanu Mehta says: the UPA government's approach to the well-being of Muslims is threatening to inject an insidious poison into Indian politics, whose ramifications for all Indian citizens are too dreadful to contemplate. This is a man your Prime Minister appointed to the Knowledge Commission.
You know, that shows the greatness of the Prime Minister.
In other words, the Prime Minister deliberately appoints people whose views he disagrees with.
He may have appointed not one, he may have appointed many.
Is this not embarrassing?
Amongst them, no, not embarrassing. I mean, it instills happiness in the minds of persons like me. Look, he may be intellectual, he is intellectual, academician. I have respect for him, so hats off to him. But it's not necessary that I should agree with what he says.
All right.
I have my own views.
Don't agree with him. Let me then explain to you why your critics think that the creation of a Ministry of Minority Affairs is the wrong way of handling the problem. To start with, they say that a nation is more than just a geographic entity. It is a fusion of hearts and minds. But when you classify people in terms of their individual religions, rather than in terms of their nationality, you end up undermining the nation and you end up destroying the concept of Indianness.
Mr. Thapar, if we are a secular democracy, which I claim that we are, and I'm sure about it that we are a secular democracy, this ministry is Ministry for National Integration.
But the name doesn't suggest that, does it?
Beg your pardon?
The name doesn't suggest that.
My concept, I am put as a minister.
But the Prime Minister appointed you as Minister for Minority Affairs. You see, your embarrassment means you have to change the name of the ministry.
No, I'm not changing the name. My concept I said. I didn't say my name.
So the concept exists under a contradictory name?
No, not contradictory. To you it is contradictory, to me it is supplementary. Listen, not supplementary, it is the soul.
Can I explain why I think it's contradictory?
No.
Let me explain it, then you answer it. Inherent in the concept of minority affairs is the fact that you are setting Muslims apart from the rest of the country. Inherent in the logic of what you're doing is the belief that Muslims are different and they need to be treated differently, and the difference is their religion. That's the problem.
Not at all. You know me. A R Antulay will never do anything for minorities, any minority, any religious or linguistic minority, which is not in the interest of the nation. If it is in the interest of the nation and also in the interest of the minorities, surely I will do it, without least hesitation.
You see, we are very lucky to have an A R Antulay, a man who is so highly principled. But what if someone else was Minister for Minority Affairs? I'm not talking about Mr. Antulay. I'm talking of the ministry, the concept behind the ministry. And now let me quote to you Rafiq Zakaria, a former deputy leader of the Congress party, and in his time one of the most highly regarded Muslim scholars. Do you know what he says? There can be no meaningful separate agenda for minorities. Gimmicks are no remedy. The minorities must realize that they have to stand on their own feet and rely on their own strength.
Yeah, that's why
you don't need your ministry.
No, I subscribe to this theory. You must prepare the ground so that they can stand on their own feet. They cannot stand on their own feet on the water.
So you're preparing the ground with this ministry?
Of course I am preparing the ground that they walk hand in glove along with the majority. There will be no distinction between minority and majority. A day will come when they will go shoulder to shoulder along with all others.
In which case, let me point out some of the problems about the way you're preparing the ground. To begin with, if you classify people according to their religion,
you have been classified. When were they not? When were they not classified?
But let me finish the question. If you classify people according to their religion officially in the way you treat them and the way you target them, you are pushing them into the hands of conservative mullahs and orthodox organizations. You are undermining the hold of liberal opinion. That's the first problem. You're pushing Muslims to the conservative extreme.
Mr. Thapar, who was in power in 2001? Have you seen the figures in 2001 census? Are they not divided on the religious minded? Not for division, for the sake of knowledge.
There is a big difference between a census which treats people as Muslims,
now
Christians,
you know,
Hindus and Jains and government
people,
policy.
No, please don't.
And government policy. It's not a
A
quibble.
person like, it doesn't behove a person like you for quibbling. If you are quibbling the word, no. You must know, you must confront, you must go face to face with the problem. You know, I will grapple the problem with the four locks.
Then let me come face to face with the problem.
Yes.
It is because you insist on classifying religious groups as minorities and pushing those minorities.
Not religious only, linguistic
and
also.
Pushing those minorities.
No, you also say linguistic.
And pushing those minorities into the hands of the most extremist conservatives, that people like Sania Mirza and Taslima Nasreen are subjected to fatwas from narrow-minded fundamentalist mullahs. That's the reason why the Shahi Imam can presume to tell the Muslim community how to vote. You've created the context which justifies such behavior. That's why it happens.
But Shahi Imam gave a fatwa, as you have said just now, but Muslims did not exactly follow. You know that.
But
and you know there is a 1 minute. And you are always talking. For the past 5 or 10 minutes, whatever the time, I have lost sense of time here, since we are talking. You are only talking over the religious minorities. My ministry includes also linguistic minorities.
Because it's at the level of religious minority that you threaten the speciferous tendencies of the country, as the Supreme Court has said, as Pratap Bhanu Mehta has said.
Pratap Bhanu Mehta may have said, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, excuse me, may have said so, I respect the man, but that does not mean that I subscribe to his theory.
I've also quoted the Supreme Court.
No, 1 minute. Supreme Court may say so, I may have different view.
So you differ from Pratap Bhanu Mehta, you differ from the Supreme Court.
No, I said you are doing something wrong to the Supreme Court by taking it out of the context. 1 minute. Let me complete. You can't just, browbeat me, excuse me. Let me have my say. I mean, and I'm not here sitting in the dock for cross-examination.
Absolutely.
You have come to elicit information from me.
I've come to you because you're an enlightened man who I think is embarrassed by the portfolio.
No, not at all.
That's why you've rechristened it national integration.
If suppose I was embarrassed, I would not have accepted it. They didn't give it to me before asking me or contacting me and talking to me. The Honorable Prime Minister himself talked to me.
Let's come back to the subject we're talking about. I mentioned one reason why the classification of religious groups as minorities is dangerous and silly. Let me mention a second reason. If you target Muslims as Muslims or other religious minorities in terms of the religious minority, you end up treating them as vote banks. You give them benefits as a religious group, and in turn you expect the religious group to vote for you. In other words, let me finish. In other words, you end up manipulating their interests rather than furthering it. That's the danger.
You see, very unfortunately, the basis on which the democracy flourished in this country or anywhere in the world, you have totally forgotten it, and that is the manifesto. You will say the manifesto is issued by a political party to gather votes, garner votes. Yes, of course so.
Can I quote to you Rafiq Zakaria once again, writing in his book published 2004? Let me quote you. After independence, Indian Muslims became a pawn in the hands of political parties and were maneuvered merely to obtain their votes. Your form of ministry, your form of religious focusing not only encourages that, it makes it inevitable.
You see, Dr. Zakaria is no more. I have respect for him. May his soul rest in peace. But Dr. Zakaria was in Rajya Sabha, was deputy leader, as you yourself have said. Throughout his life he was in Congress. He had ample opportunity to correct the wrong if he thought that it was wrong.
All right, let me then quote to you Abu Saleh Sharif, appointed by the Prime Minister personally to the Rajinder Sachar Committee. Let me quote him. Muslims are largely important as a political tool to be used as a vote bank or as mere tokens in India's claim to unity in diversity. Once again, your entire focus encourages this.
May I tell you one thing? I didn't know that you will bring so many persons for quotation. If you had brought these authorities, I could have bring 3 times more.
All of these are authorities on your side. They're congressmen, they're people appointed by the Prime Minister to committees.
1 minute. PM has appointed many people, one of them is him. But that does not mean, that means...
You said the same thing about Pratap Bhanu Mehta a moment ago.
No, that shows that the Prime Minister does not want only congressmen. He does not want only those who subscribe to his political theory.
Or it shows that the Prime Minister has made a terrible mistake in creating the Ministry of Minority Affairs.
May I tell you one thing?
Because these people were appointed before he created the ministry.
You will please wait for 1 year. again come here for interview, and within a year, if your view is not changed, that this ministry I wrongly thought was a ministry for to feed and encourage vociferous tendencies, I was wrong. I'm sorry about it.
I'll happily.
If you don't say so, I bet.
I'll happily come back after here. I
Yeah.
look forward to the opportunity of apologizing to you, because as I said earlier, A R Antulay is a man who perhaps will not misuse this ministry. But it's not A R Antulay I'm talking about. It's the concept behind the ministry. Let me put you that as a result of the vote bank mentality that lies behind this sort of religious focusing, do you know what governments do? They even go to the extent of defying the Constitution or the Supreme Court if the vote bank that they want to help is in some way enhanced. This is why when the Supreme Court strikes down the Aligarh Muslim University Act or the Assam Immigration Act, instead of accepting the Supreme Court's verdict, your government has committed itself to passing legislation and undoing what the Supreme Court has done. That's the consequence of religious focusing and vote bank mentality.
You see, every political party is after vote bank. I don't say this ministry is created for that purpose, but
so you're no better than other political parties.
I have not completed. You interrupt me in between. Excuse me. I said, I gave you the example manifesto. You say no political party should issue any manifesto whatsoever before elections, because they do it only for getting votes.
Mr. Antulay,
Vote boy.
Mr. Antulay, you know how far your vote bank mentality goes? Your government even considered inquiring into the army's recruitment policy because you thought that you could confer benefits on a particular religious community as a result. You did it without realizing that you were threatening the sanctity of the army, possibly threatening the sanctity of India. That's the problem with vote bank mentality.
I think we have not read suo motu statement made by the, defense minister.
Made under pressure from the opposition, from the press, from the three service chiefs themselves.
No, 1 minute. You see, that is the statement given suo motu by the finance minister, by defense minister. If you had read that, you would not have put this question. But let me refresh your memory. Sachar committee issued that, maybe not necessarily that the commission. Sachar is an eminent jurist, eminent lawyer. Maybe certain circulars have been issued by his commission, not necessarily by him.
All right. It sounds as if you're suddenly disowning the Sachar committee. I'll leave you with the last word on that. Yes. Let's take a break and let's come back and ask a slightly different question. Not the principle behind targeting religious minorities as religious minorities.
But before that, I'll say,
let's talk about whether this way of tackling their problems has succeeded or failed. We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an exclusive interview with the Minister for Minority Affairs, Abdul Rahman Antulay. Mr. Antulay, in part one we talked about the principle of a Ministry of Minority Affairs and the principle of targeting minorities as minorities. I put it to you that in fact this hasn't worked. The assumption that the problems of the Muslim community can be tackled by tackling them as Muslim problems has actually failed. Because today, 58 years after independence, the Muslims
but why are you talking?
remain...
Excuse for interruption. You have interrupted me 3 times, let me interrupt you once. Why do you say Muslims, Muslims, Muslims?
Because
Christians are there, Sikhs are there. In fact, Jains are going to be there.
The cutting edge of my example as the Muslims.
No.
If you let me finish, you'll soon understand. 58 years after independence, the Muslims remain amongst the least educated, the most poor, the worst represented section of Indian society. That is proof that you're targeting them as Muslims hasn't helped.
How many years after Lincoln, the blacks were
So because the Americans were slow in helping the blacks, you're justified in being slow in helping Muslims?
If you can quote so many people here, you brought quotation by doing homework. I didn't know what you were going to ask me, and I don't bother to know what you are going to ask me. What you ask me, I'll give with my own ingenuity rather than quoting somebody.
Let me.
Therefore, I am saying what I feel. I am not taking help of someone to butter my...
In which case, let's leave Lincoln to history and to the Americans. Let's instead focus on the reports done. For example...
You said 58 years. I said that because 58 years. No, if 58 years is a big period, after how many years I mean, the blacks were included as citizens of the
Let's focus on the
along with the whites.
let's focus on the excellent reports done by people like Abu Saleh Sharif, who last year in October produced an excellent thesis on Muslim education, looking at primary, secondary, higher secondary and university education. He's concluded that Muslim enrollment, not performance, just enrollment, is only marginally better than that of the castes, of the scheduled castes, which means that 58 years after targeting Muslims as Muslims to alleviate their problems, you haven't even got them to school. That's the extent to which your tackling of Muslim problems has failed.
Now, excuse me, you are such a nice person, such a great intellectual, but I am forced to say that you are contradicting your first question by putting second question. Now you say that your Muslims do not have the basis of education or basic education or primary education. Why are you talking of Muslims? Why are you not talking of Indians as a whole?
All right.
Why? Because we have to. No, I know. I'm happy about it that you so.
Let me talk about religious minorities without defining which one I'm talking about. And once again, I will quote Rafiq Zakaria. Why? Because he was deputy leader of your party. Because he's on your side of the political divide. And he's your side of the political divide.
If he thought it was wrong.
The doles given to religious minorities by successive governments, both at the center and in the states, haven't made the slightest difference. And then he goes on specifically to talk about Muslims. He says, Indian Muslims, their condition in every respect continues to worsen with each passing year. He says 70% of them live in villages and are barely able to make ends meet. They are forlorn and rudderless. I put it to you that attempting to tackle the problems of Muslims as Muslims has failed. Give it up. Tackle it as individuals, tackle it as members of the nation.
Dr. Rafiq Zakaria, a great thinker, a great educationist, great intellectual. But why should he have taken so long to realize it? When he was in authority, both in the state and the center, I mean, don't you think he should have made some corrective?
But because he took long doesn't mean that you can't benefit from his wisdom.
That's what I say.
Benefit from his wisdom. Don't repeat the same mistake
again. That is why I say
again.
that if suppose 58 years have, I mean, the government of India has taken 58 years, I mean, to bring about this ministry, don't think that they should not have done it if it is correct.
Let me quote to you once again Pratap Bhanu Mehta, appointed by the Prime Minister.
You can keep on quoting. I quote myself. I don't quote others.
But I'm quoting Pratap Bhanu Mehta because he's on your side of the divide.
Doesn't matter.
Everything that the UPA is proposing with respect to Muslims, from reservations to separate auditing, is retrograde.
That is his view. That is his view. Not necessarily Antulay's view, not necessarily Manmohanji's view or Sonia's view.
And you know the second cost? The first cost is that by targeting Muslims as Muslims or religious minorities as religious minorities, you haven't really helped them at all. The second cost is that you've made them victims of a Hindu backlash.
Mr. Thapar, if I knew that you are going to bring this research done and quotations, I would have myself also collected tenfold more and confronted you with the same.
You're the minister. I would have imagined that you've got this research at your fingertips. You don't need to collect it.
No, that's why I didn't collect, and I'm saying so. Not as
but
researcher.
You don't need research to counter the point I'm making. I'm making a simple point. I'm saying not only have you not...
But you don't have to quote.
I won't
make
quote.
Your own point.
Not only have you not benefited the minorities and specifically the Muslims, worse still, I'm saying that your religious focusing has made them victims of a Hindu backlash. Today, Hindus listen to your rhetoric, they see your religious focusing, they don't realize that it's not working, instead they resent it, and they convert Muslims not into beneficiaries, but into victims. And you're to blame once again.
I don't think you are correct in blaming the Hindus. Hindus are very tolerant, this country is tolerant, Indians are tolerant, they are not the same as you say.
But you're testing their tolerance, that's the problem.
No, you think so. You think so, not they.
You're creating
if they had thought so,
you're creating divisions between two Indians by classifying one as an Indian and the other by his religion. That's the problem.
No, he's also equally Indian. I say I am Indian. I am a Muslim and an Indian.
Government policy doesn't talk about Hindus, yet government policy talks about Muslims. Why?
Muslims?
Because you're dividing two people by talking about one's religion.
Why are you equating minorities with Muslims, you know?
Because it's the single biggest one. Because it's the cutting edge of the argument. Because it's the minority that is most disaffected and disadvantaged.
Throughout the interview, You have not used any other religious minority or linguistic minority. You have used only Muslims, Muslims, Muslims. I think, you know, there is some, excuse me for being a little more frank, with some bias.
None at all.
None
at all.
Which makes you, I mean, put these questions.
You can certainly, for purposes of rhetoric, and certainly for purpose of reply, suggest that I have a bias in my heart.
No,
you know,
not against Muslims.
I don't.
I didn't say against Muslims.
There is, however...
Bias means not bias against Muslims. Preconditioned mind,
yes,
putting a certain question...
There is a preconditioned argument. And
not
the
argument,
reason
mind.
No, the preconditioned argument is because by using Muslims as the reference point, I actually
Not
give
Muslims.
a cutting edge to the religious minority argument.
Again you are making a mistake, you know. Minorities include, you know...
Do you know what academics in India say? I won't name the academic
Look.
because you're going to get upset if I name the
No,
person
I'm not
again.
going to get upset.
Muslims in India, let me finish. Muslims in India will be far safer and more empowered, not when we at every step heighten the consciousness of majorities and minorities as separate groups. Rather, Muslims will be better served when the distinction between majority and minority becomes irrelevant. Why can't you accept that principle?
I said that in the beginning.
But you can't make it irrelevant when you're Minister for Minority Affairs.
Please, my goal is, I said in the beginning, that everybody should think that I am not majority, I am not minority, I am Indian. That is my goal which I want to achieve, A. And B, I wish it was a live interview. I hope that your Caesar will not, you know, cut certain portions.
Not a word. Every single word that you've said, including the insinuation that I have a bias in my heart, will be portrayed.
No,
but let me add one thing.
No, bias does
let me
not
add one
against
thing.
Muslims.
But let me add one thing.
Bias means...
Before we end, there is hope.
Please consult Oxford Dictionary for bias.
Let me end with one word. There is hope that you won't in fact misuse the ministry that you hold, only because I suspect you're embarrassed by the name. And in that hope
I would have
lies
not accepted
the
it.
future.
If it was so, I would have said no. I'm sorry, I will not be accepting you.
Mr. Antulay, a pleasure talking to you on Devil's Advocate.
Delighted indeed. I'm delighted talking to you after a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.